Hi, welcome to the channel, and welcome to another edition of our Masterclass series. This time is a special episode where we are joined by Justin Carris, the Charlotte Regional Champion, to talk about positioning, one of the most important elements of the game. This video has taken us a lot of time and effort, so I'd really appreciate if you could like, subscribe and leave a comment. Also, along with this, we will be releasing this episode on Spotify. Given the nature of the videos are quite conversational, and the fact that we have quite a lot of long videos, I thought it'd be a really good idea if we could release this on an audio platform as well, so you could listen on your commutes or if you prefer an audio platform. Spotify and YouTube as of now and going forward. Without any further ado, let's get into the video. I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Hey, what's going on? My name is Justin Carris. I'm the 2023 Charlotte Regional Champion, a veteran Pokemon player. I love VGC, and I'm happy to join you on this show to talk about one of the more important topics in the fundamentals of competitive Pokemon.
No, thank you for being on, Justin. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about a variety of topics around positioning.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it too. It's a pretty broad topic. There's tons of things that people get wrong about it, and there's different ways that you can approach it. What do you want to go over specifically first?
Well, why don't we start with what is board position?
So, the way that I look at board positioning is everything that you do in a match, in the actual game that takes place, to progress to your win condition. There's different elements of that. Making sure that you have an advantage offensively by being able to output the proper damage, take out their key threats. Making sure that your pivots and switch-ins for defensive synergy are able to come into the board safely or allow you to repivot for a better offensive position later. Or there's a more interesting way to play the game sometimes where the board positioning is more flowcharty. And these we'll get to. I think I'll have a lot to say about those specifically later, but yeah, I mean, it's really just like this. It's your application of how you progress to your win position. It's not just, the order of which you pick your team or having one defensive switch in. It's like the entire flow of how you are progressing towards your win conditions.
For sure. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, looking forward to getting into the more deeper into. I don't really do that, but yeah, for sure. Looking forward to getting into each of those and what makes them up. So why don't you talk to us about the different styles of board positioning?
So I touched on a couple of them, and this is for simplicity's sake. There's a lot of nuance in how you can use these different ways to play the game. I see it as kind of like three buckets. The first bucket is a very aggressive or offensive damage-based play style. There's a lot of advantages to playing this way. Using fast things that hit hard means that you are less likely to succumb to some type of RNG factor, like a Thunderwave para or a T-Bolt para, the infamous Paul Chua flinch, as we used to call it back in the day. The Paul Chua fake out is actually the correct terminology. Freezes, long pivotty switch matches, switch heavy matches. There's a ton of room for error where there's crits and all this other stuff. So having just a very high octane start can afford you a lot in terms of getting an advantage early. It opens up a lot of options for pressure and making sure that your opponent doesn't have time to kind of recover. And there's a lot of Pokemon that really take advantage of this. So there's specific tools that we have, like right now, we have Urshifu. It's unfortunate every single format that we have Urshifu in, but it's kind of consistent. And that's like the one nice thing about it. You always know it's critting. You always know it's going to do that weirdly large damage range that it has. And you can't really protect around it. So unless you have a Wheezing team, I know I'm going to see a comment about that. Unless you have a Wheezing team, you're going to take that Surging Strike's damage. So having tools that are able to reposition around that are really helpful when you have a big weakness to it. But offensively, you can almost always rely on that damage. If you only do 80% with a super effective attack into an Amoonguss, and you know that you're going to pick up the rest of the KO with your Surging Strikes from Urshifu, it's really reliable to be able to, kind of corner those Pokemon into those positions. Obviously, nobody wants to sit in front of an Urshifu when it's super effective, but there's tons of people out there that will like do things like EV specifically to live like a Jolly Focus Sash Surging Strikes with Incineroar. So Urshifu is a really, really cool, useful piece for offensive styles of teams, and that's why we saw it flourish in a format like Regulation E, a little bit in Regulation F. Probably should have flourished a little bit more in Regulation D than it did. And honestly, in this generation, we've had a ton of offensive pieces that enable that offensive play style, a aggressive, win as fast as possible style. And I love using pieces that do that because there's intangibles even in tournaments where the faster you win, the more time you have to relax, the less brain power you use. So from a positioning aspect, it's very, you have to be a little bit precise at times. You can't just spray and pray, because if you lose those offensive pieces, like if you get out of position, you will have no ways of recovering. It kind of sounds counterintuitive that offensive teams are like have to be so precise. Like you would think that it's just click button, do damage, but truthfully, you really have to have your pieces out that are going to do the exact amount of damage you need. And sometimes you have to know like what your resisted damage hits for the switch-ins are, like the Urshifu Amoonguss example. How much exact damage are you doing into Raging Bolt? You have to know when your close combat is going to be more effective than your Surging Strikes when they have the opportunity to Terra through surging and stuff like that, and how people utilize those pins and that pressure is what kind of determines that offensive board positioning or an offensive style. You can ask a question. Go right ahead.
I would say absolutely. But so would you say offensive board position is exclusive to more offensive styles of teams, or do you think it can be more of a play style thing as well?
I think the most impressive forms of offense, Toller Webb said in a very fun tweet that I like, he used the wording, offense is art. Like hyper offense and aggression is like an art form. And like how you team build offensive style stuff it's to taste, right? Art is a little subjective. If you are really, really good at making sure that your pieces are always in the right position and you're never really banking on, or like you're really good at calling terras and calling defensive switches, you feel like that's just the way that you want to play the game, you can go frailer. You can have less defensive utility and balance in your composition. But I prefer styles of offense that kind of hide how offensive they are. And there's more to it than just using really strong combinations and type synergies. I would say one of the basic blocks is like having strong neutral damage. So over the formats, we've had Xerneas and Groudon back in 2016. Ground and Fairy cover a lot of Pokemon, either for neutral or for super effective, but very, very rarely for resisted damage. I mean, if you think about it, that combination, Steel Flying or Steel Levitators, they're the only things that really get through that. It's why Fluttermane and Great Tusk was something I enjoyed using so much. And I like Pokemon that, have very good like dual stabs. Iron Bundle was also a great example of that, where like there's nothing that really switches into Iron Bundle. It doesn't take a neutral hit from either Freeze Dry or Hydro Pump. So it's always on the board. It's always off-putting. It's always putting out very strong offensive pressure. Blood Moon Ursaluna is another great example of that. It's possibly the most demonic example of that, because not only does it have perfect coverage into almost everything, except for Corviknight, another Steel Flying, Steel Levitate. They love doing this. Game Freak, stop, please. But it has an ability that overwrites one of its immunities in Mind's Eye. So it still hits ghost types for neutral. So using Pokemon that are really powerful, spread damage, so that way you can maximize like the effective value of the damage that you're doing on that turn. Having some bulk on one or the other side, so that way you can kind of know when to pick your spots. So for example, Great Tusk, I have familiarity with it. On the defensive side, it's tanking hits all over the place. It would take a jet punch from a Palafin, which is crazy because that thing was obscene damage and is the highest base attack that you could run into in that format. On the opposite end of that, what's something with a really high special defense? I mean, Chansey is the obvious example, but
like Florges Primarina.
Tyranitar is the one I should have thought. Tyranitar has a really high special defense. And same thing, like as it's doing damage, you want it to be out in front of specially attacking Pokemon. So utilizing the advantages that each Pokemon has in their bulk is like how you get the most out of offense. Another trick, honestly, in the offensive stuff is redirection. Speed control helps circumvent weaknesses, but it's like getting the maximum value out of the damage potential that your Pokemon have. And then kind of as an accessory, making sure that you're utilizing their partners effectively, cover their weaknesses. So that way you don't have to worry about taking an attack from something. You can make, literally by keeping your offensive piece on the board, every single time you do that, every turn that you do that, you're maximizing value. You're improving the value that you get. And then I would also just throw in lastly too, that like something that really dominates offensive playstyle and offensive board positioning is a concept that we'll probably go a lot more into later, called trading and damage trading. You need to know when the 90% that you're about to do to something, in some cases it's less than that, 60% damage that you're going to do to a target is worth the knockout that they are going to give you in return. And then what Pokemon might come in after that, because that pushed you closer to the win condition. There's been so many situations where knowing that damage is the exact amount of damage that you need to win this matchup, offense allows you to leverage those, option selects. Like, I can do this, you can take my Pokemon. And sometimes it makes it look like, your opponent is just in your head and it does mental damage because they're like, why would you make that read? I could have knocked you out. A lot of the offensive players are thinking, I don't care that you knocked me out. I knew that you could knock me out. It's bonus if I survive. Like, you're the one that made the mistake, letting the mistake fall into your lap.
Yeah, I saw that. Was it a tweet the other day that was going around, which was like, you may think it's a 50-50, but the offensive player knows it's really something that the other player will almost always do, and it's not 50-50 to the hyper offense player. It's more like a 90-10.
Depending on who tweeted that out, I will agree or disagree. Because
was Ben
Ugarte tweets that
Ben
out.
Grismer? So it's because of Ben Grismer origin.
Yes.
Just dug up
Ben's allowed to say that. Ben is absolutely allowed to say that. I was also going to say that Ugarte is allowed to say that. I'm not allowed to say that. I don't think that way. And we'll go into that later. But I don't think that you can say your opponent is 90% of the time going to do this play, so that makes my play better. If there is a route for you to lose. I'm forced into positions where I have to rely on my ability to take those odds and bank on my knowledge of experience and expectations from what my opponent's going to do. But I prefer to think of it in a vacuum and like, what is optimal here? And I consider the fact that they can make that read or that the player can punish me for this offensive play rather than having to need the read.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Also, kind of as an addition to that is very often you don't have switching options on a very offensive playstyle, which is why I was saying that, redirection can be really, really valuable. Fake out is also really, really valuable. These sound like things that are like really important on balanced teams. They're just as important on offensive teams. Indeedee enables hard trick room teams. Those are really, really offensive teams, even though they don't fit the exact mold. Same thing with Dundozo. Those or Mouse Ape, they have Mouse Hold with redirection. It can be very, very important for enabling your offensive pieces. to some extent, pretty much every team leans into some type of offensive identity. I think defensive identities in teams are kind of lacking in the last few generations because we've had so many gimmicks that power up your offense so much. Z moves was first, then we got Dynamax, now we have Terrestrialization. Terrestrialization is one of the more defensive of those gimmicks, but the pieces defensively that we've been given have not really kept up in the pace of power that we've been given. Photosynthesis Pokemon, I mean, we've never seen a Pokemon in VGC like Fluttermane, ever. There's nothing that can switch into it that resists it. You can switch into one of its sides, Shadow Ball with a Dark type, Steel type with, Fairy with Moonblast if that's what's coming out. But you can't switch into both of those moves comfortably. I mean, unless you have, or unless you're like digging into the viability depths of Pokemon that are not viable. So like, what is the Grafaiai? Is not a defensive switch in, but like normal poison would actually be something that resists that and could switch in on Fluttermane. Great Tusk was another example where like there's very, very few things that are switching in on fighting and ground, except for like flying types and I guess bug types. So defensively, the identity over the past that most teams have taken has been, is Amoonguss legal? Yes, let's start with Amoonguss. Step 2 is what intimidating Fire Dog is legal? Is it Arcanine or is it Incineroar? If Arcanine isn't as good into the meta or people get really good at countering their Arcanine, you're going to lean into Gyarados. Gyarados is usually the next best option. Salamence comes in after that. So it's an Intimidator, something with Fake Out, something fat, something really, really big that can take lots of hits. And AV Iron Hands has filled that role now. I feel like AV Iron Hands kind of, I want to say like almost changed the course of my memory because I feel like there's been other Iron Hands-esque type Pokemon. Rillaboom, AV Rillaboom has kind of been the closest thing to before Iron Hands in those formats before. AV Rillaboom sits in there now. But, packaging as much utility as you can from tools that allow you to maneuver around people's offensive options. Where the win condition of offensive styles and the positioning of them is get the best combination of effective value that you can in terms of damage at the start of the game to give you a big enough lead to close the game out. Sacrifice whatever pieces that you are going to if you have to have a follow-up sweeper. Sometimes you start with a Tailwind setter too, or a Trick Room setter, etc. The damage will trade you into a favorable endgame, and then you lock it up. You take out their priority users, you have a guaranteed KO, GG. That's the offensive win condition. On the defensive side, you want to go for something that's more well-rounded. Rather than relying on offensive isolated targeting, you're saying these pieces will outlast you. And if you think about it, the brilliance behind that style of play is the flexibility. Arcanine, Amoonguss, and Palafin back in however many regulations it was popular in, I think 2 or 3. Eventually it became Incineroar, Amoonguss, Urshifu. Landorus, Amoonguss, Urshifu. Rillaboom, Incineroar, Urshifu. These cores that, they have the right typing, they have the right damage to kind of win anything as long as they get rid of the stuff that threatens them. Because Amoonguss can Pollen Puff, restore your health. Rillaboom has grassy terrain. You're positioning so that way you can always get a knockout at the right time. You're tanking hits. That's what people probably think the gist of a defensive style of board positioning is. There's definitely, as I said, more nuance to it. And it changes depending on what is available in the format. I mean, you take Fluttermane out of the equation and there's not as much, damage coming on the special side. Not only does that impact the ability for pivot cores to shape, it impacts the ability for other offensive pieces to take those places. So for example, in Regulation H, I think one of the coolest things about that meta, I'm not saying that I loved it or hated it or anything, was the rise of Archaludon and Basculegion on rain teams. Because without Fluttermane, you don't just have a team that's going to redirect your single target attacks with an Amoonguss and then delete your entire board with Fluttermane. The absence of Fluttermane meant that there wasn't really an established defensive core to go to as easily, because all these other offensive pieces that would just get edged out by Fluttermane now exist, and they all exist in their own unique way. So obviously we still saw Incineroar and Amoonguss, but people experimented with other defensive options like Indeedee. Male actually became pretty common, not only because it was allowing Sneasler to exist and abuse and burden, but because it provided defenses against fake out spam and rotating all these pivoting pieces, and you could just do a ton of damage with Expanding Force offensively right away. You could combat the Rillaboom's grassy terrain and mess with their positioning, and that's kind of like how those teams fought against. That's kind of how offensive teams fought against defensive teams. We saw the progression of Indeedee like throughout the entirety of that meta.
Yeah,
Archaludon kind of never really developed or grew anywhere past being like partnered with new things like Dragonite and Scale Shot. The metagame's always going to dictate like what these cores shape up to be. To kind of reiterate, the defensive style is trying to, in a lot of ways, choke you out and have extra room to make mistakes, not trade into favorable positions, but pivot into favorable positions, redirect into favorable positions, punish you with status moves. Think stuff like Grimmsnarl with Thunder Wave and screens, and then have something that really, really takes advantage of your pieces getting you in the right position. So in the modern format, we have Terapagos with Incineroar, Rillaboom, and an Urshifu, or Follow Me, Ogerpon. That's the type of example where that is a defensive team, and you are either enabling some type of offensive sweeper that needs time to set up or time to get going, or it needs something out of the way in order for it to fully operate.
Yeah, for sure. I think the more defensive styles. Well, as a new player myself, I've found that harder to grasp. I think I've recently just started using Amoonguss, Iron Hands, like a really quite bulky, pivoty core, and like I'm used to playing more offensive stuff with just a bit more, bit less precision required. And it is quite interesting to pick up that kind of slower paced team after a year or so in the game, and actually realise that it's just as easy to, there's still a lot of options to win with, but it's not something that comes naturally to me at all, instead of pressing Tailwind, Surging Strikes, or a bit more experience, would you say?
I would say like the order of thinking on why I feel like most people gravitate towards offensive styles. It is so much simpler to design a game plan around this is the damage I can do, let's see what they do to counter it, than a defensive pivoting, very, very mid-game heavy team where so many things, you're going to see so many more variables that you've never seen before, board positions that you've never seen before, have to do damage calculations on the fly. You have to be much better at picking up on what your opponent's bulk is and seeing when something is a roll. Sometimes it's more intense, and honestly those teams have to be better designed in a lot of ways, because you have to have the precise Terra, you have to have the right Terra, because if anything falls apart to some type of offensive sweeper, it loses its strength as a core, and you don't want something that can pin both your Incineroar and your Amoonguss and your Urshifu. That's not fun, and that defeats the purpose entirely.
And then you've already alluded to it a little bit, and that would be the flowchart style of board positioning. Why don't you talk to us about that?
I'll make this one quick, but hopefully people that are like that have much more expertise in these styles of teams can provide some extra feedback on this. But the way that I see it is you either lean into one identity or the other, the offensive or the defensive. I think that higher skill ceiling players tend to gravitate more towards the balance and flexibility of the defensive teams. It depends on the metagames too. If the defensive cores are really, really powerful and cover a lot of their matchups, most really high-level players that are worried about travel awards and Worlds invites and consistency are going to, prefer a team that gets them a much better matchup spread, and they can outplay anybody. And that works. That just works. It's why European tournaments take forever, because they are pivoting back and forth for 3 games on every stream game at every single tournament they go to. And it's always players that have so much experience at the international level. And it's also why when you see a new face popping out onto the scene, it's very rare where they have a very pivot heavy style of team, unless they're like extremely, extremely talented. The Justin Tangs of the world. There's other players that I wish I had written down a list of.
Yeah, Sempra.
Well, Sempra is the opposite example. It's going to be very, very offensive style of team. I mean, if you think about his breakout, he won a tournament with an extremely offensive core. And that, just to me, it's not like it's not a slight to that style. I lean into that style myself. But it's just much more rare to see somebody pop in with like an Arcanine, Palafin, Amoonguss, and to be able to use it correctly. Yeah. That's partially why, a player like Tang impressed me so much. Oh my God.
Patrick Connor's NAIC? That was like a balancy team.
Yes. He is honestly, that's one of the better hybrid teams that I've ever seen exist. Sure. That doesn't, you always lean in one way or the other, in my opinion, but that was like almost right down the middle, but it definitely leaned more balance. But it had a lot of offensive pieces. Cool. Antonio Sanchez is another example of like, he took Wolf's Charlotte team and just pivoted, just used it beautifully, and then won one of his first events with that. But you could kind of see the talent shining through. The more extreme versions of all of this, I think, is kind of like a mutation of offense, which are flowchart teams. There are a lot of players that I'm sure have used the expression, I lost to their flowchart. And the best examples are the Mouse Apes of the world, the Indie Armor Rouge, the Dondozo with Chi Flutter and Dragonite Chiempao. Those teams have such powerful polarizing tools that are so volatile to face. You have to have such dedicated counters to them. Not only is it difficult to cover all of them at the same time, the way that their strategies execute it's just like almost so antithetical to how a normal Pokemon match will likely be played in dealing with offense, dealing with a really bulky team that can pivot around. You're dealing with a Dondozo that has +2 in every single stat and unaware. And the ability to switch in Tatsugiri and completely negate damage from spread moves in one slot. Like, there's so many things about that playstyle that are so ridiculous, that are extremely enabled by Terra. Would not be as bad without Terra. And its ability, unaware, meaning you can't really, throw up defensive setup and be like, I'm good for the Dondozo for now. Unless, of course, you have... Actually, it doesn't even work if you have unaware yourself or if you have, like, a Weezing, but we've even seen ability shields at tournaments before when Dondozo was considerably popular or Weezing started coming back. The Indie Armor Rouge thing, like, man, I can only remember in Regulation C, D, like, so many people's matchups into Psy Spam was, I will not play Psy Spam, or I will win my round 1 and 2. Because all of the people that like using Psy Spam, this is a generalization or a stereotype, whatever, they're not going to make it out of their rounds. The people that have counters to that stuff will. And they'll all be fighting to the death because they can't beat each other. You know what I mean? That doesn't work now because you have really, really talented Psy Spam players, really, really talented Dondozo players. I'm going to throw up real quick. I'll be right back. Those words just came out of my mouth. Really talented Mouse Ape players also could throw up at that one. The skill level of the people that like really, really lean into those archetypes is going up way, way up there. And you're adding that layer of, my team already struggles against this concept's flowchart. Now I have to struggle against a player that knows that I know what the flowchart is. And that's why Brian Collins is always fun to watch on stream. Nathan Ortiz is always fun to watch on stream. Like Ben Grismer, it's always like this puzzle, this crazy chess match of watching people call bluffs and whatnot. And it always looks crazy because there's a lot of times they have to make plays based on the skill level of their opponent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Alex Soto, another European player, for just leading to hard trick room. The majority of the time, he's got a wider skill set than that. I think he plays Koga at the moment, but you never want to face him when he's on hard trick rooms. It's very scary to face.
And I think nobody's really, there's not many one trick ponies. I think some people really typecast themselves as like, I'm a Psy Spam main, or I'm a Dundozo main. That's the only thing I know how to play. You can do something different. You just like how effective it is.
Yeah, for sure.
And, it's like the mid-tier main in a fighting game.
Yeah.
I can always matchup check people that don't know how to play this, but then you have the excuse of, I played a top player, they know how to beat Dundozo.
For sure. Yeah, I had Conkeldonk Roshio on recently to talk about Dundozo, and he didn't even take it to Worlds. It's not one trick pony, but that's sort of how he made his name. Getting regional finish with that. So
I know. Man, we have a little bit of history, but I've never really considered him a one-trick Dundozo player. I did notice his success when he was using Dundozo in online tournaments, and I noticed the tournaments that he brought it to. But yeah, again, most players that are, capable of making it deep into tournament runs, it's not because they're using a stupid volatile flowchart team. It's because they know how to play the game. Sure. And very often that ability will translate to most styles of play. It's just dependent on what you prefer. I would love to have a preference for defensive styles of teams. I think that they're better. I think that they're more consistent, and that would probably be better for my ability to play throughout the season. It would be less Hail Mary-ish of cracking some type of offensive idea and hoping that you run into the right teams or matchups or whatever. But I struggle with it. I really, really just have a preference for offense. And that might be how it is with a lot of the players that use the flowchart style teams. I think if you like to play that way, go for it. There's no wrong way to play Pokemon, just a way that I will judge you for.
Absolutely. So moving on, why don't we start talking about win conditions?
So win conditions. So we've talked about this kind of, amorphous concept. Here's this big blob of Pokemon theory and board positioning. We broke it down a little bit. I'm trying to simplify this because I could probably do a full semester's worth of lectures on the theory behind all of these things and the nuance, and we could have a full discussion about clicking fake out turn one.
Is it optimal?
That's why it would take me so long to explain it. There's no right or wrong answer. We'd have to go into the fundamental reasons and board positions. Depends on who you're targeting. It's never right to click it into your own Pokemon, or is it? Maybe it is. The idea, all this theory, let's just treat it like some type of energy. I'm trying to structure it. So I've broken 3 things down. We have kind of really 2. The offensive ideas, the offensive styles of board positioning that are much more trading focused, damage specific. You're attacking into resists most of the time because you don't have a good pivot, or you will just trade effectively. You're punishing mistakes because the opponent is pressuring a KO and you just know that you're going to trade better. The opposite side of that coin, you have a very well balanced, flexible team that can pivot around, maneuver into good positions, set something up that can or clear the way for something like a Calm Mind Terapagos, Calm Mind Raging Bolt in earlier formats. In some cases, these identities borrow ideas from each other, where offensive teams have mid-game Trick Room options, and then all of a sudden the pacing switches up. So you have a Scarf Urshifu with Chien-Pao and then a Farigiraf Iron Hands in the back. A lot of players have done stuff like that. Or you have really, really offensive pieces, so that way you can set up an Iron Defense Komao in the case of Michael Zhang, who won I think it was Sacramento 2024.
Yeah.
That team was absurdly offensive. You don't realize it because it's a Como team until you play against it, and you're like, whoa, there's a Miracle Seed Rillaboom on this team, and a Choice Specs Fluttermane, and an Iron Bundle with Icy Wind. And they all have offensive Terras. Why do they all have offensive Terras? It's because, if they get the one KO they need, then all you're left with are 3 Pokemon that literally lose to Como. So sometimes, again, like they borrow, they remix. It's funny, like I don't know if I could properly identify that playstyle as one or the other. It might be a really strong hybrid of both. But getting into why these styles exist and why I'm classifying them this way is the function of what they enable, which is you are progressing through your board state, the state of the game, to a finish line. You're progressing from here to here to here. And at this finish line is your victory, your win. Before that, right before that, is the win condition. And it is kind of like this slider that goes back and forth. The better the decisions you make, the less RNG you get, the better your matchup is, the further this gets the closer this gets to the start of the game. Sometimes you see somebody do something turn 1 and somebody forfeits. If you can knock out a Trick Room user and a Trick Room setter on turn 1, you automatically win into the size spam teams if they don't have a play to get around it. If somebody has no way to, if you have like an Urshifu Dark and you have a way to, with like Choice Band, get the Dondozo at a lower speed, you Terra Dark, they don't have Terra Fairy, you kill the Dondozo, your win condition is much further back here at the start of the game than it would be here. And bad matchups, obviously, the win condition, sometimes like the matchups are so bad, it feels like the win condition's on the other side of the finish line. And honestly, those are like the situations where like, okay, I have the ability to flinch. I can get off this many rock slides. If I get one of these 4 rock slides, maybe I win. And sometimes it's actually worth it to really factor the ability to do that into the equation. Especially if it's like one of the only outs that you have. In an endgame where you have a Porygon 2 versus an Amoonguss, you need a lot of good sleep rolls. You need to stall their recover. And they have to have a low HP in order for that to happen. How you design your literal condition to win the game is the win condition. And what we do with our plays is advance towards that winning lock. You want to make it 100% every single time that you are playing, regardless of a low damage roll or a missed attack. Every decision you make in the builder and every decision you make in team preview, your Terra types, your items, these are all to make it so that you have the easiest time getting to win conditions as possible. Then you factor in all the RNG, and that's why Pokemon tournaments are always a toss-up, unless Wolf is there.
Yeah, it feels that way at the moment, doesn't it?
Really consistent teams that meet your play style, that you have a lot of passion for, that you believe in, that you really studied and do your practice with, you move that win condition, the criteria of meeting that win condition back further and further. You're not guessing on a damage roll. Your ability to design these win conditions is contingent on how much information you can process and how quickly. So if you limit the information by knowing all your damage rolls, knowing all your game plans, knowing habits of players on specific archetypes, specific Terra targets that they like to utilize, things that make the games more annoying for you, that's how you kind of design these win conditions. And the board state is instrumental with the win condition because of the nature of Pokemon, right? We have 2 things on the board. You have Protect, and you don't usually know, you have like kind of like a randomness to what could be in the back. So the better you get at predicting what your opponent will bring in the back, the better you get at predicting what their Terra targets are. You just kind of increase the value of your processing power in pushing you towards your win condition. Yeah, team preview is a very specific thing that, look, if you ask me right up front, you're like, how do you approach team preview? How does it factor into the board state? The answer is a little bit easier. But I think team preview is like, is so specific, and it's so like kind of unique to Pokemon in a way. We have to push this into its own little category, because it's a skill unlike a lot of the other skills in Pokemon. Your ability to make predictions loosely ties into team preview, but it's also really pivotal in how you start your games. Like, if you think of it this way, right? If you could always bring the right 4 and lead correctly, how much easier would your VGC life be? How much of a better player at VGC would you be? Would it be 30%? 40%? The answer for me, what do you think it is for you, if you could do that?
I reckon it's 50 or up. I reckon it's that important.
That's how important you think that your team preview...
I think if you knew you could always get the lead right and the 4 right, then
okay.
It's somewhere in the 50, I think.
I'm going to leave us on a cliffhanger. If I could always get team preview correct and always predict exactly what my opponent would bring in the back, I would get maybe 0.5% better as a player. Because I hope people don't flame me for this. I hope this doesn't get taken the wrong way, but I genuinely believe that there is very little room for me to grow in that one department. Obviously, there's always something to improve, but I know it, like, the exact process that works for me to make my team preview effectiveness 100%. Like, I've almost already maxed out my stats in that ability. And I genuinely feel like that is something that you can improve, focus on, practice, target, and it's its own specific skill set. I think that there's very few things in the game that like really set players apart in terms of like talent and other things. Sometimes it can be really hard to recognize what it is that gives you an edge. That's one of the categories I think that some people just have a natural, like ridiculously high feel for, like game sense for. And my stat for it, I think, started a little bit higher than most, but I don't think that, but I really, really worked to improve it. And like being able to understand your deficiencies in that, what you're doing wrong with that. Let's put that to the other side of this, because that's kind of like the final missing piece in understanding how to really approach your style and what to do in approaching your win condition, what to do with your board state. So aggression, reads, prediction. Let's put that all kind of, these are all terms that I'm going to be kind of using interchangeably right now that all basically mean almost the same thing. If you think about what a read is, God, with these philosophical questions, again, attend VGC 101 in Lecture Hall B. We have a 3-hour lecture on what a read is. A read in the context of Pokemon in its most simplified, pure form is, to me, a guess, an educated guess. Everything else that we do should be according to plan or within expectations. A punishing read, the adjective matters, is way different than just making a read, because there's soft reads, there's really, really hard reads, there's soul reads, there's reads where people will smash their DS over their knees, or their Switch over their knees. God, we might have to edit that one because that one reflects poorly on me.
That's staying. Yeah, like you've seen. I'm sure you've seen the little DC pop up when you get someone on ranked ladder.
Yeah, somebody smacks a DC or whatever. Yeah, so rage quitting, etc. But basically, the weight of a read is really only determined by emotional factor. You can do emotional damage. You can do mental damage with a read. And then in actual practical two robots playing against each other, a read is really just, some type of educated guess, a deduction, punishing some type of habit that rewards you at a risk. And those two concepts, risk and reward, much like the offensive and defensive discussion, are two sides of a coin. How much you risk for how much reward you get is kind of what determines what's a read. So there's a lot of decisions we can make in Pokemon. I have a very guaranteed knockout into all 4 Pokemon because I'm running Ursaluna Mega Dynamax, and it gets a new signature G-Max move that just makes you lose instantly. That's 100% guaranteed. That's never stopping. They only gave this to one player for some reason. I don't know why. He's the main character. He can do it. GG's. Or you have an Urshifu Rapid Strike. Not that much different. You are attacking into an Incineroar. They don't have Terastallization, or they have 4 fire types. You have Rain Up. Very, very easy. They're never going to be able to outdamage your Urshifu. 100% locks. No extreme speed, crit, no sucker punch, no priority move that is going to crit you, knock you out, no trick room, no ability to set up trick room and turn the speeds on their head. Like, that is a 100% locked condition. You've got the game in your hands. A read comes into play when you add something into that equation that changes that 100% certainty. Soft read means you only have to cover 10% of those positions. It's now a 90% guarantee that you're going to win, but maybe they have a Terra Water for Ridgerath. And then they can set up Trick Room, and then they can reverse sweep you because they have a Choice Specs Lantern. Who knows? Obviously, really, really good Pokemon players bring really good teams to tournaments. They practice really, really tough matchups. They have experience against each other at the highest level because they're always in day 2 and they're in top cuts and they're playing against each other. Joseph Ugarte, James Evans, Wolf Glick, Riley Factura, Gavin Michaels, Alberto Lara. I could name so many more. They have a lot of experience in these day 2s and the top cuts, and they're picking up habits. They're downloading all these different things. And even then, I think a lot of those players are very rarely applying many reads. There is just their game plan and where they adjust based off of the player, based off of the positions that they're put into. You know, they're not saying, oh, I'm playing against Wolf. I have to do this super secret game plan that I came up with for specifically Wolf and his team and his play style. Maybe they'll look at his pace and try to formulate a spread. Some people will throw stuff into Showdown and actually lab stuff out. I've been guilty of that myself. It's not a crime. Sometimes you just forgot to check your Dondozo matchup in a Haze format where every single Dragonite has Haze and it's the 3rd most used Pokemon. Anyway, so yeah, you don't really tool your ability to play into those players and the risks and the game plans very, very precisely to one person. It's usually to the team, if anything. And then if you see something that you didn't realize before, maybe you need to practice it. Your building partner played Gavin Michaels on stream and he did something you guys have never ever seen before, and it's really, really tough for your team to beat. That's a good time to think about that. How this applies to the reads is very often a read is not always really a read. It's part of a game plan and the opponent made a mistake. It looks like a read. Oh, he switched something in. I did this attack, for example, Amoonguss is at 10%. I throw a close combat into the Amoonguss because there's maybe an Incineroar is going to come in into, I would say Urshifu. Probably Urshifu.
What's Urshifu?
And it looks like, oh, he made this crazy read. Most people would know that's not a crazy read. The close combat was going to get there anyway. That's the softest, lowest risk thing. Now, if you could get knocked out by a Thunderclap, because there's a Raging Bolt on the other side of the board, and then you have a Landorus on your side with your Urshifu, are you guys making that trade? Are you going to take the Landorus? Are you going to take the Urshifu with a Thunderclap? Or are you trying to clap? Are you going to burn your Terra Fairy? Let me tell you, with Terra, it is very difficult to simulate board states and describe them to people that might not know everything about that stuff. But I do my best. So yes, the soft read obviously is that situation I'm talking about. Amoonguss, 10%, close combat. Throwing a spore into an already spored Pokemon is maybe a degree of difficulty higher in terms of making a read. That's one that you'll probably see a lot of, especially if you watch European streams. Because you're utilizing pretty soft guesses, soft reads, but they're a little bit harder than the last one, to kind of bank on the mistake, kind of catch your opponent making a mistake. They're asleep, you don't have that much offensive pressure with your Amoonguss, you want to try and catch them switching out. You have to pick probably between 2 targets. Which one are they going to swap out? If they have a Gogglesmon and a Pokemon that's asleep, that's kind of where the read comes in. how we utilize that aggression is very often deduction. How you make those reads, how you make that type of adjustment. Very often you can't expect your opponent to make mistakes. You can't say, these are the mistakes that my opponent is supposed to make. I know exactly when they're going to happen. No, that's not how it works. It's a rhythm. It's a feel. It's a lot of vibes, genuinely. I'm sure some people probably understand that description of it more than most. And sometimes it works out more than it doesn't. I would say that a few things that are important about them is to be not afraid to make them, no matter who you're playing against. And then the converse, don't feel like you have to make these types of plays to beat somebody that is so much, quote unquote, stronger than you or more experienced than you.
I think that actually leads us very nicely into, like, you know, player versus player. Look, who you are playing. Like, for example, I at Gdansk faced Victor Medina Torviv for round 3, and you know the pressure of playing one of the best players in the world is extreme. It's different to playing someone you don't recognise or one of your friends at local. Or like, how does that factor in to this?
And our third lecture in VGC 101 Lecture Hall Room C is the player versus player skill set. So when I talked about team preview, when I alluded to what we will talk about in team preview being a skill, your management of brand and scouting and player recognition and understanding people's experience level and play styles, both myself and other players that are at even higher level, way higher levels than me, have talked about doing like actual scouting and studying of people's play styles. Patrick Connors, when I did my interview with him, actually talked very explicitly about before his NAIC match, he studied Aurelian's play style. And I think that that's a great time to do it the night before a finals match, because you have all night to figure it out. That's probably where you'll get the most use out of it, though.
Yeah.
And it doesn't extend terribly far beyond that, because focusing in too much on a player's play style doesn't account for the situation where they know that you are studying them, and they are just going to counter that by playing extremely ambiguous. In fact, in Wolf's video, where he talked about our match in Orlando, he literally said that verbatim. We had played the matchup a million times. We had practiced it. It was abysmal for him. And he knows that I know it like the back of my hand and know how to whoop his butt with it. And what he did to make it more difficult for me was he literally played like a crazy person. Like, he did things that he was not allowed to do in that matchup. And that worked out wonderfully for him. He brought it to game 3 and probably should have won that set based off of damage rolls. I got like a 12.5% roll with Ivy Cudgel and Dozamungus. And only barely won game 2 to make it to that position in game 3, where I feel like it was, unwinnable after turn 1 in game 3. But him playing ambiguously in game 1, literally just like, it disoriented me. It made it so much more difficult to play against him. So you can't just say, oh, this is Wolf, he's going to play like this. And I wouldn't say that that was the first experience I ever had with that. Wolf has always kind of spanked me when we've played. When I play players out there like Ugarte, I never expect them to do something based off of who they are or their play style, because I have always encountered, more often than not, that biting me in the butt. Like, these are the best of the best. They're giving their best. They worked incredibly hard to be there, harder than you did. Not harder than I did, but harder than you did. And they're going to adapt. They know how to adapt, and they know how to throw curveballs, and they know how to think of things on the fly. And they're calculating all these win conditions, and their best positions or their best odds of victory like a crazy person. Literally, like, that's all their brain is meant to do in that moment. They don't have to worry about dinner until later. They don't have to worry about their, paying their friends for the hotel until later. Right now, all they have to do is beat you. So expecting a player to do something, I think, comes with a lot of risk. And I think a lot of people get the post hoc fallacy where like afterwards something worked out for them. Oh, I just, called them to do this and this because that's what they should do. And then they think that that's why they were rewarded. When in reality, it's more often than not, your opponent made a mistake and it worked out for you. There is a caveat to that. I do think that like teams that have very specific play styles are much more prone to like very specific pivotal errors and mistakes in certain spots. It can become very obvious what their Terra option is. Sometimes they have sometimes matchups can be like, I really have no other Terra option, so it's much more one-dimensional, and they couldn't formulate a game plan that really didn't break from what they're expecting. And that can make a read much more punishing to go for. It also depends on the tools that you have in your team. So when we talked like offensive stuff earlier, I think that, Ugarte and Riley Factura, when they were using that Ogrepon Pau D-Knight team in, I want to say regulation E or F. Might have been, I think they used it in both E and F. That team was demonic in a really, really unfun way. It had only moves that could hit you. It had all this ridiculous offense that was enabled by Chi and Pao. It really, really didn't like playing against Komao, but we didn't know how strong Komao would be until Riley lost to it in that finals that he played against Michael Zhang. But that team is like the prime example of something that like will reward your ability to make reads and will reward you for those decisions that you make based off your opponent's skill. I'm going to get really aggressive here because my opponent needs to reposition. That kind of leads us, though, to the next piece of that, which is you have a best of 3. So the caliber adjusts like a slider in many ways. How I approach it, I treat everybody like they're going to beat my butt. And I play the same way until I need to not play the same way. I'm trying to always optimize what perfect tournament day Justin can be. And when I need to, I can kick it into high gear if that's not enough. I have a higher ceiling than just 100%. You can do 110, 120. And honestly, sometimes I have to psych myself up because I play players that, even though I feel like I'm just as good as them, if not stronger than them, their results say otherwise. Someone like James Evans on paper has a way better career than I've ever had. But I admire him so much as a player, just watching him. Like, I don't look and say, oh, all of these tournaments, whatever, he got all these results in seniors. No, he got the Masters. He made it immediately to NAIC finals, won NAIC finals, won another regional. He's a Triple Crown winner. And then you watch him play and it's like, it's a very distinct style, but I don't treat him like when I play him, I have to adapt to James Evans mode. Like, I know that it's going to be a tough match and I get excited about the prospect of being able to play an incredible Pokemon match, bring my absolute best versus somebody that's of that caliber's absolute best. Now, honestly, I try to treat everybody that's not James Evans, not the Rileys, I'm using a lot of the same examples, but like, some international examples too, like Gomez, if I'm playing Henry Rich. I don't tone it down, my excitement, to play people that are brand new to the game. It's just a different form of excitement. Okay, I want to give you my best because you're brand new and I want to show you how awesome this game can be. What optimal gameplay can look like. Give me your best too. Very often I'll play somebody and they'll say something along the lines of, which for the record, they should not be saying. I'm not that intimidating. My name is not that big. They'll say something like, oh, whoa, it sucks I have to play you this round. Or like, oh, I know you, whatever. It's probably a lot more dramatic if they're playing against like, Wolf or Ugarte or somebody else. But I've gotten that occasionally, more often than I think is necessary at all. Zero is necessary. And my usual response to stuff like that is like, it's an advantage if I don't know who you are. It is a massive advantage if I have no idea what your play level is going to be. Because truthfully, I'm going to play like you're a beginner. I'm going to play like as optimally as I can and treat your decisions like you have to prove to me what you're capable of. Because until you do that, I'm not going to take any huge risks. I'm not going to try to adapt and download your play style. That, again, has always bit me in the butt when I do it. And I'll always tell people in that moment, if they say something like that, no, like, don't be afraid at all. Like, this is going to be a fun match. And I lose to people that are brand new to tournaments all the time. I've lost to people that have not played for 10 years. I've lost to a 9-year-old at a local because she absolutely destroyed me with Cartana's Beast Boost. Like, that happens. Anybody can win. It's just like football any given Sunday. And I kind of contradicted myself a little bit there. I adjust a little bit to caliber, but just in my application of my game plan. You know, I probably will take less risks, like slightly less risks against somebody that I don't know the caliber of. And I will maybe allocate a little bit more of my mental bandwidth to understanding how they're going to play, what they're capable of, what they're doing. For example, and we'll talk about this in the team preview section, if they lead what I expect them to lead, that's already a mark. A+. Good work. You know what you're doing. If they don't, and it's not a legal lead, and they will lose because they led that, 100% of the time I'm correct and they lose. Maybe 99%. You never know. RNG. If it's something that I didn't expect, but it's really good, and I'm like, oh crap, then either they got lucky, right? I can't control whether or not I can't know with 100% certainty that they knew exactly what they were doing here and got this lead right. Or if this is just their default game plan in my team and I've never practiced it or I've never considered it, didn't spend time on this matchup, whatever. So it would take further gameplay for me to really identify that. It doesn't change much though what I'm doing each match between these people, the people in between that are, you know, just right there on the cusp of breaking into a day 2 or haven't made their top cut yet, but they're getting better, versus the regional champions or the multiple major champion victories.
Sure. No, I think that's really helpful. And like, yeah, I think what you said about just, I suppose I'm on the other side of things, and like I said, probably the optimal approach from someone of sort of my level is just not to be scared, to just go play your game and just, you know, see what happens. Like, you never, like, prove yourself. Like,
yeah, I would say on the opposite end of the spectrum, like the best thing you can do is lean into the fact that they might not know anything about you. That doesn't mean swing for the fences and make really, really heavy reads. That is not what that means. But don't be afraid to make a clever play. If you are like very convinced that they're going to do something and that's, you know, in a vacuum, probably the optimal play, like that's probably your best chance to get a punish. Save that punish for game 2 if you steal game 1. When you take that risk, there's logistics to a best of 3.
yeah.
Winning game 1 is the most broken thing you can do. It is the most powerful thing you can do in a best of 3. Your opponent has just suffered a loss, and then they have to play you again. That sucks. So you already have an advantage. If they don't have really good mental fortitude, and they're reeling, and they're like, oh, why did I lose that? If you crit them, they're thinking about a damage calc that they didn't understand, or they thought like was a max roll or something, or why did they not Terra there? Why did they not switch? They're thinking about all these things. People without really strong mental games, they're going to crowd their mental with that. Winning game 1 is a huge advantage in that area. Also, if your team has multiple modes and you used one mode in game 1 and the other mode is more powerful and they don't have a way to cover both, now you can just use the other mode and then maybe they're just screwed. Well-designed teams will usually not run into that issue, but some things really, really force lead roulette, especially in bad matchups, especially in formats like Reg G, where like the restricted that you choose can really, really determine how your tournament goes based off of the other restricteds that you run into. And then, you know, you're also utilizing resources in that best of 3. If you are in a losing position in game 2, stall the clock. Stall the clock because you have a game 3 and you have to think about all of the information that you're going to be applying in that game 3. What you can learn about their play styles is really important. what you can learn about what type of risks that they like to take is important. And then what information you have hidden is really important. If you have a piece that has a completely unknown EV spread, you have a Cobalion somewhere in your team and they're like, well, I have no idea what this is going to do.
You'll never believe it. That is what I took Cobalion to Birmingham. I literally just got...
Oh, really? You had Cobalion?
Yeah, the Electric Seed Miraidon stuff. I did not do well. My friend did lose his win and then to cut, but I ran into the bad matchup. We didn't prep for Hard Trick Room, and I faced a lot of it. That's another thing that you can't be doing. But the team was solid. It got a day 2. It almost got a cut.
Hey, dude, making day 2 with Cobalion.
Yeah, props. We were hyped. We were so happy. I know, I think 5 of us brought it, 1 of us day 2, but that one. Come on.
That's special, man. That's going to be a favorite in your heart for the rest of your life.
Yeah, man.
Doing well with Pokemon makes me like them more all the time.
Yeah, I've got lost someone. Yeah. But, no, it was cool. It was a fun team. It was fun that you picked out that example.
That was completely random, too. I had no idea that's what that you were the Cobalion dude.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. I don't think... I struggled to see myself as the dude because I did not day 2 the team. But, the team was fun.
You were the dude with the dude.
Yeah, one of the dudes,
one of the dudes. Yes, so let's rein this in.
Yeah.
I went off on a lot of topics, partially because in order to really understand what you're doing with your board positioning, you need to know a lot about a lot of these things. There are different skill sets. I'm not even covering the team building portion or like your tournament prep portion because, again, in the course of VGC 104 now in Lecture Hall D, it would take me forever to go into all of these details. Get yourselves a really good VGC coach. I have a long wait list and no time, so shoot me a DM. Maybe I'll let you know. But when I talk about these things, in order to really get the full picture, I talked earlier about this gigantic blob of VGC theory. We segmented it down into aggression or offensive, like the styles of Pokemon. You have a little bit more offensive leaning, defensive leaning, the volatile stuff outside doing its own thing, picking grass and looking at the sun, staring directly into the sun with no sunglasses. And then you have how you utilize these styles and like the different fundamentals of each of those things. One of those pieces is aggression, utilizing reads. Another piece of it is the player versus player element, the best of 3 element. But the one thing that I wanted to push a little bit further down the line is team preview. And now I posed the question earlier, how much better do you feel like you might have gotten or how much better do you feel you will get as a player if you have perfect team preview and perfect, always bring the right 4? Part of why I wanted to phrase that question that way was I had a feeling you'd give me a decent chunk of a percentage. I feel like most people would probably see it that way. I think even some of the best players in the world might see that way. I think about the game a little bit differently. I only have so much time to actually play Pokemon. I basically even already gave up on this season just because I'm not gonna have the time to really push for Worlds, and it's a lot. I like to prepare really heavily for tournaments. I get super sucked in, so I have to optimize what I work on. I would not spend much of my time preparing for a tournament working on my team preview skill. It's already polished. It's already as good as I think it's going to get, and it is only really ever improved by repetition and practice with a new concept. I'm not using the same team for every single tournament, so it's always a couple things. The first element of team preview is how quickly you can study a team, how quickly you can turn around an idea and adjust on it. Because we don't use, as I just said, we don't use the same team for every single tournament. We have rotating formats, metas change, especially with terrestrialization, where a small terra change can completely shift the meta and how good your matchup is into specific teams. You can't just be a one-trick pony. Or the one trick needs to be really flexible and you need to roll good matchups at the tournament. So how good you are at team preview, the first piece of this is how quickly you consume knowledge about what you are supposed to lead and what you are supposed to bring. How you organize that information also plays into this. if you have a fantastic memory, you never forget exactly what you're supposed to do into every single Pokemon. Don't need to write anything down. Don't need to play any ladder games. God, I wish I were you. But I need to do every single form of learning in order for me to really properly study something. And that is so slow. I have to write, I have to listen, I have to speak, I have to see, and then I have to do and practice. And each of those is different levels of effectiveness, but I had to improve my ability to study and be better with each of those skills, because my time and my location and my setting can literally change how I'm going to study. If I'm on a plane, I'm much less likely to be able to watch YouTube sets and look at somebody playing this matchup. I'm much less likely to pay for a ridiculously expensive plane Wi-Fi and practice Showdown like some people do. Get help. 3, I'm not going to be playing GC matches on my Switch so that I can get comfortable with the team on the actual console, because I would rather eat glass than play best of one closed team sheet in a Terra format.
You're not
very
playing
often
the next GC.
No, I have a large tub of glass to eat, and then I will be playing the next GC actually. Because you never know, maybe I do well, and then I'm like in spitting distance of a 2 tournament Worlds invite. You can pray or whatever. I also just like to play sometimes. I don't know that I will. It's very unlikely I won't. I only played in 1 GC this entire season, I think, or maybe 2, and I gave up in one of them because like I lost my first 3 and I was done, or like lost 3 really early.
It's a very mental draining tournament. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
It also has no impact on me as a player. Like I don't feel better because I do well in a GC. I don't feel like I really improved anything other than like maybe information processing speed, but I have other more efficient ways to practice that. And then everything else is pain and suffering or hilarious. I much prefer to just watch somebody stream the GC and laugh at their pain.
I tend to, I got 30. I got top 512 with Luminion this season because I had a Specs Kyogre and no one knew that I was Specs Kyogre, and I just won on turn 1 a lot of the time.
That's a different skill set.
And but it's not saying, I don't know if it puts me out there as a better player. I just they didn't have the information, and that's what makes best of 1 closed team sheet, especially with Terra, so hard. It feels like a different game completely.
Feels like a game that should have never existed, truthfully. And also the best of 1 element. Like the things that make me the best as a player, or at least my skill sets that I have to work on, I have to improve for consistency, or like my adaptation, my ability to bounce back from a loss, to quickly adapt to and study a matchup. I get none of that from a GC. Some people enjoy them. Some people want the practice, and there's definitely things you can practice. I think that the GCs are actually really great for practicing elements of team preview, predicting what your opponent will bring, vibing out and feeling when there's a focus sash somewhere, or they have a safety goggles on them on. Like this is skills that we would practice in what VGC used to be. But I've always preferred more information, partially because I feel like you're going to get the information somehow the deeper you get into the tournament anyway. And sure, we lost some of that surprise element, but that is like VGC 146 in Lecture Hall AZT or something on why closed team sheet is better. That's nowhere near this discussion. But to call back to what I was going to circle back really quickly, to use some corporate terminology, I genuinely believe that you can study in the different ways that you can study. That sounds redundant, but like if you're a visual learner, you can focus on getting better at visually learning. You can figure out which of the other things when you're visually learning helps you support your visual studying and stuff like that. But working on your studying and like how you absorb information on a quick turnaround, especially when you don't have a lot of time. You have a 9 to 5. You're a university student. You are in seniors or juniors and you have chores to do because your parents are disciplining you properly or making you a respectable young person. You have something, restricting your time. Sorry, that was a little bit of an extreme example, but I'm saying I'm trying to think of reasons why kids wouldn't have a lot of free time. Maybe that's some trauma dump. Anyway, ways that you study and like the effectiveness and the usage of your time will dramatically impact your ability to turn around a good team idea or a well-performing team in 2 weeks before a tournament. And that's all you get. And there's a lot of variables you can't control before a tournament. Like you get sick the weekend before. Maybe one of your friends leaks your team. Maybe somebody counter teams you and you play it on ladder and it completely destroys your confidence and you want to switch to something else because now everybody else picked that same idea up and it's all over the top of the ladder on Showdown. So being able to have a quick turnaround on a team idea and how quickly you absorb information on it, that is literally the number one thing that you can do to get better at team preview, because nothing else will get you a faster ROI. If you can study on a plane what you need to do in every single matchup that you possibly could face on a plane ride, that's about the sweet spot. If you can write out from memory exactly what you're going to do in every single matchup, and then you go play those matchups in the tournament and everybody leads some variation of what you expected and it went exactly as you expected, that's a pretty good litmus test. And I'm sure a lot of people are like, whoa, yeah, that happened to me. This is exactly how I do it. I think a lot of people do it this way. Some people do it in a different way. Some people will just save replays. They'll log and catalog every single replay from their Showdown matches. They'll just play 1,000 games. Carson Confer. 7-8 matches at the same time, and they'll go to a tournament and they'll just absolutely dunk on everybody. I'm jealous of the ability to do that.
I'm all for Showdown and like replays. How do people play like multiple games at once? That's never. I've seen like I used to like watch old Wolf stuff, and he like if you play like 6-7 games at once just to get to like where the ladder's respectable. It's like, how do you keep track of 5 or 6 games? It blows my mind, man. Like.
Honestly, I think that's a good way to practice.
Yeah.
Once you can do 2, but the only thing it does is it helps you practice your board state analysis. So how quickly you can turn around a decision, it's really good for raising your floor of decisions. It's not good at raising the ceiling of how good your decisions can be. How good you are at utilizing every second of the clock will make your decisions great. But like quickly seeing a board position, analyzing as much information as you can, if you want to speed up that process, I actually think playing multiple games is very, very good practice if you're able to do it. And the way that I describe it is it's kind of like playing piano and using 2 hands on a piano. At some point it just clicks, or singing and playing guitar. Try it. It's not easy to do it at the same time. But if you do it enough, it eventually just clicks. One of them becomes autopilot. And I would say maybe it's just like the turns that are available to you become autopilot. The analysis of the board state is the other piece of the 2-factor equation, right? But yeah, in terms of like the study and then the turnaround on the team preview information, let me repackage that a little bit better. How this all ties into what I'm talking about. You have limited ways that you can study before a tournament. You have limited time that you can use to make sure that your team is absolutely perfect. If you're switching teams constantly, you're literally spreading out all that information, especially if they're really, really different styles, tons of different pieces. Sometimes the information will conflict because they're different terras, and then you have bad replays. So being able to do the study and the practice on a notes app, on a phone, on a plane is very good. Being able to write it on an actual notebook, putting together some type of replay analysis that you want to look at. Sometimes I'll screenshot things and I'll just look at the board position and visualize things in my head. I don't know if you've ever seen Queen's Gambit, but anybody that has, there's this like thing where she like visualizes the chessboard and the pieces, and sometimes like being able to do that in your head will, it helps you to figure out exactly what the positioning and where the pieces got to go. Super long tangent on the team preview thing. The only other piece other than the turnaround thing, because all you're doing is accruing data to help you make the deduction for what needs to happen. The only other piece of the team preview is the decision tree between, do I care what they lead, and do I have to care what they lead? That's the only other piece of the equation. if specific leads are going to just run you over and you have to cover for them, you better hope that there are not more than 2 of those options. Actually, no, I think the better way to phrase it, you better hope that there's not more than one of those options. So for example, Indy Armor Rouge and Lilligant Torkoal is a great team preview exercise. If you cannot lead into both Indy Armor Rouge and win the game, and Lilligant Torkoal and win the game without getting good sleep turns, that's not a matchup. You didn't do your job as a builder. You better hope that you dodge it. That's one of those. I do not need to. If you have a good matchup at a Lilycool, you know, when there's a lot of volatile stuff, things that just wins on like the flowchart, or they win because they get good sleep rolls, things that are really disruptive. You don't want to get Thunderwave parried by Grimmsnarl, because if your Urshifu gets paralyzed, you're going to lose in the mid game. Shiliang Tang's team at NAIC was a great example of not realizing how much you have to care about like punishing their leads, like with Thunderwave, with Will-O-Wisp, etc. Like it was just a very disruptive team, and that team was just very good at being able to like put you in a position where you didn't have the gas to win, and in an innocuous way.
Right, so that brings us to the end of the positioning masterclass with Justin Carris. Justin, anything you want to plug, and then we'll get out of here.
Check out some of the newer YouTube channels out there. A lot of people are doing stuff. I'm so happy that you brought me on to talk about the higher level stuff in the game. I hope it was easy to follow. If not, feel free to ask me questions. You can also check out my YouTube. I do a little bit of story-driven content on YouTube to kind of just color in some of the blank spaces in our game's history. We lose a lot of the game's history for not having as many matches and a lot of the emotion behind the game. We're doing a little bit better job going forward of capturing that. But I also want to encourage people to do it themselves. Please pick up a microphone if you love VGC, you love this stuff. Stream, talk about the game, ask questions, review matches, do your things, guys. Obviously my channel is Azazel VGC. I think it might just be Azazel actually. I don't know. I'm running out of
I'll link it.
And leave me a comment, hit me up on Twitter or whatever. Twitter's Azazel the God. You can also just search my name. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming, man. Really enjoyed it. We will catch you next time.